This episode is sponsored by Property Filter. Find great deals faster.
Hello and welcome to the Financial Freedom Podcast, sponsored by us at Property Portfolio Building. This podcast is designed by real people on their journey to achieving financial freedom, and we'll focus on people who've either already attained it, who are joining us on that journey, or maybe a specialist topic that can help you build your technical knowledge to achieving and maintaining that financial freedom. We hope you enjoy it. Welcome back to the Financial Freedom Podcast, and today is one of our technical discussions where we at Property Portfolio Building are going to talk through one of the key things for people considering doing any type of development and or conversion, really focused on the landlord developers of the world, to see if we can add value to you and your journeys, and hopefully encourage people to take up, being a landlord developer. So today's topic is the really front end is getting an understanding, even before you do this classic thing of jumping onto Rightmove or Zoopla and seeing what properties are available to purchase, is having a fundamental understanding of the space, the light, and the rights that you have to do the type of developments that you might want to do. So today's topic is space, lights, and rights, and we're going to work our way through that.
Sounds good.
So, space, lights, and rights. We're going to start with space. So space standards are forever changing. So the caveat on all of these topics is always, it's as of today and always get your own advice.
And also
right?
There's national space standards, and then there's differing space standards between different local councils as well.
Yeah, so we're in 2024 right here, right now. And this is not formal advice. So this is just a general chat about what we use to help decide whether the property is going to work when we are looking at them. And there's two key things that most landlord developers look for. They're either going to do something like a flat development or a house development, or they're going to do a HMO development. So we're going to talk about both of those things from a space point of view. So we'll start with the technical class of C3, which is a dwelling house, otherwise typically known as a house or a flat.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about the national space standards associated with those.
It's a property with really one home in essence.
Yeah.
It can be a bungalow, a terrace, a semi-detached, or a flat. But if it's got one family in it, or one couple, it's one household basically.
Yeah, that's it. So it's this class C. It's called class C3, which is a planning class. And it's basically, like you said, a house, flat, bungalow, one of those two things. So what we're going to talk about is the type of space you need to have, and actually the slips, trips, and falls when you're actually looking at those spaces. So if we look at the space first, the traditional thing that most landlord developers look at is 1 and 2 bed flats, right? That's if you take a building, commercial to residential, or you take a big house and you convert it into flats. That's the typical thing. So why don't we start there? So we're looking at, you tell me, Tim, a 1-bed flat. Tell me what you look at when you're thinking of a 1-bed flat?
Well, I know the absolute minimum for a flat conversion with the current national space standards is to do a studio flat. Mm-hmm. I believe it's 39 meters squared at the moment, and that's a nationwide. It does jump up, and do not quote me the exact numbers at the moment, but it jumps up when you go to 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, and also whether it's on a single floor or a double floor.
And occupants as well.
And the amount of occupants. Yeah. So it's a fairly complicated way of looking at for a development. And there's some good guides you can get online actually that show you exactly the split between them.
Yeah, the government website's the best source of information for this. So I have to say, .gov have got this, the technical space standards. Yeah. But we're going to talk about it. So you said 39. Actually, that's with a bath.
Yes.
If you remember. So 39 square
37
meters.
if it's a shower, I believe. Is that?
Yeah, 37. So the minimum you can do is a 37 square meter single floor dwelling for 1 bed, 1 occupant.
Yeah.
Technically.
Yeah.
When you look at it from a planning class. And we're going to talk at the end just about the difference between occupants versus communal space versus licensing standards versus planning standards versus how you sell something. Yeah. Because they're all different, right? And that's where this stuff becomes really, really important. So 39 meters if you've got a bath, 37 square meters if you've got
with a shower.
With a shower. Yeah. Why does that matter though?
I suppose if you've got a bath, it's adding in more meterage to the other usable space.
That's it.
Isn't it? Yeah.
It's because certain things, it's the space between the walls, right? So that's how it's measured. So if you have a bath, it's typically going to take up to 2 meters extra than a shower, right?
Yeah.
So that's where that comes from.
The other commentary I have on this is that these space standards, apart from the bath and the shower, there's no real other design requirements apart from complying with regs and stuff like that. So, because, when I look at it, I go, you can have a 25 square meter studio that's designed really effectively and it's a really good space and really usable and really nice. That doesn't comply with this space standards. Or you can have a really poorly designed, horrible, studio apartment that's 37 or 39 square meters, and that does comply. So, it is quite a blanket rule. But anyway, that's the rule.
And when we talk about rights, we're going to talk about permitted development rights and permitted development rights with prior approval. One of the most annoying things that they've done national level is bring in the permitted development right with prior approval to convert commercial to residential property, and brought in a national minimum space standard of 39 square meters for a one.
And the other thing that we can point out as well is it's a national space standard. So if you think a studio flat in some places of London, I don't know, they might be worth £2 million as an example.
Yeah.
In certain places in the northwest or northeast, they might be worth 50 or 60 grand for the exact same flat or apartment.
Yeah.
Obviously, it makes it difficult in different locations, but there's no differentiation between these rules.
And if you think about the typical terraced house, the typical terraced house is around 70 square meters.
Yeah,
or around,
and that's across 2 levels.
Across
so
2 levels,
just meets the 2-level.
So
person.
Yeah, so a 2-story dwelling. So I've got the numbers here. So I'll run through it really quickly. So 1 bed, 1 occupant can be 37 to 39, but you have to have it on the same level.
Yeah,
there's no additional.
Yeah, it can't be split.
Allowance. You can't split the floors. A 1 bed, 2 occupants. So 2 people, just in the same bed. If you're saying that that's what you're going to do, is 50 square meters, but you can put it over two floors, but that's then 58 square meters.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about
and that's only 1 bed.
How much that's ignored in a little while. And then you've got your 2 bed, 3 occupant. So if you put 2 beds in, it's for 3 occupants. So you have to have 1 double as a minimum, and then a single. And then that's 61 square meters over 1 floor, 70 square meters over 2 floors.
Yeah, which you say is that's the average size of a terrace.
That's the average size of a terrace, which is that's for 3 people, right? And then a 2 bed, 4 person occupied is 70 over 1 floor, which would be a bungalow or a flat, or 79 over 2 floors. So if you've got 4 people wanting to live in a terraced house, most of it doesn't comply. Most of the stock doesn't comply.
Yeah, and that's a huge amount of terraces across the country with the current planning guidelines, and that's a minimum as well.
Yeah, it's the minimum space standard. Now, slips, trips, and falls on that. I've got a few points on that. So there's also widths, which is the building regs that came in 2016. So you've also got some widths. So you can't have long and thin. You have to have certain widths. So it's 2.55 meters wide for a double or twin bed. 2.7 meters wide for a double. Sorry. As a minimum, if you're doing the 2 bed, 3 occupants, one of those rooms has to be 2.75 meters wide.
Yeah,
the other one has to be 2.55 meters wide. So width is something that people often don't think about. But and this is the slips, trips, and falls that get you, because when you then do your flat and when you've got this long, thin single bedroom that's under 2.55, it doesn't class as a bedroom, and therefore, whether or not your lender accepts it or whether or not your mortgage provider accepts it, it's not going to get signed off of building regs as a bedroom.
Yeah.
So you've got to be really, really careful on that. And then you've got head height as well, which is 1.55, I think. It's just generally 1.5 on national standards, and then local, like you said, local authorities have different standards. So if you've got an apex or something like that,
your loft conversion that's under 1.5, the space below that, even if you're going to have a child in that room that's a lot shorter, it doesn't form any space of room. That's more relevant when you're doing something with an upstairs, obviously. So with more, and that's across all classes. That's C3 class and C4 class and sui generis class property. So so then we talk about the difference between the national space standards for dwelling houses, C3 class, to the national space standards for C4 and or sui generis HMO class. Yeah. Which is house of multiple
occupation, which is one of the key things that we do. So go on, let's test you.
So national space standards for HMOs. So a double room, 10.22 square meters, excluding the ensuite.
Yeah.
There's not a set size for an ensuite. It just has to, comply with licensing requirements of, you know, obviously you need a toilet, a sink and a shower as a minimum. So generally what that means is, depending on orientation, you need at least 2.5 square meters, I would say, to get those things to work as an absolute minimum. So usually you're talking about 13 square meters for a double ensuite and the double room. Single rooms for the National Space Standards be 6.51 square meters.
Yep.
And then living spaces do vary depending on occupants. But so as an example, I believe like a kitchen diner area for say a 5 occupant property can be about, I think it's 10.5 meters squared for the National Space Standards. Then if you go to say 6 to 10 occupants, it jumps up, I think, to 19 square meters. And then also you need to consider that even though it's 19 square meters for 6 occupants, you have to meet the license requirements for all the cupboard space, bench space, ovens, etc. So if you jump up to 9, even though you don't only need 19 square meters, you need a good usable space. So it probably needs to be bigger anyway. But that obviously is a minimum.
Here's 2 things which I don't understand. Right. So the double occupant room.
Yeah.
Okay. So HMO, double occupant room.
Yeah.
10.22 square meters for a C4 class or sui generis class HMO. Double occupant room for a dwelling house or flat, 11.5 square meters. Why? Like why
make it different?
Why is it different? You know, why is one this size and why is one this side for a double occupant room? There's so many inconsistencies in this, and that's the thing that I guess is the most frustrating.
But then councils are different. They can choose their own rules as well. They don't have to use the national guidelines. Some councils adopt it and some don't. So we know like Blackburn Council example is at 12 square meters.
12 square meters for a double room. Yeah.
Whereas Salford adapt the National Space Standard 10.22.
Yeah. And when we're talking about space, there's other slip, strips and falls like, and the National Space Standard, built-in wardrobes, class as floor space. In your local authority license standard, which is different to your National Space Standard, sometimes in a HMO, it might not. So a built-in wardrobe might not count towards your 10.22 square meters for a HMO room. So I guess in a way that could counterbalance because they're allowing, 11.5 could allow built-in wardrobes, whereas
that's the allowance.
10.22 is not including wardrobe. So maybe they've actually thought that. I'd like to think that maybe someone's had a think about actually they'll put wardrobes in, they may already have them or whatever. So maybe that's.
And then there are other variances as well. So, you can, if you have single occupancy room, generally you'll have to have extra living space because it's smaller and it's like, well, they're just in their room to sleep almost because they're not big enough to live in it, etc. And then there's other variances like what you call a bed sit or, rooms with kitchenettes and things like that as well.
Yeah, so I don't think a kitchenette counts towards, in a HMO room, counts towards additional floor space though, does it?
Some councils have space standards if you have a room that acts as a kitchen and a bedroom.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah.
I don't know if that's on the National Space Standard, but
no, it's not. I don't think so.
Each individual councils generally have their own rules for that. So it might be 14 square meters to have a double bedroom with a kitchenette.
Yeah, and then the minimum floor to ceiling height is also very, very interesting because in the general National Space Standard, 75% of the gross internal area has to be 75% above 2.3 meters, which some local authorities reduce that down all the way to 1.9, and I'm 1.86 centimeters tall, so I'm 6'1". So 1.9 is just is 6'1.5", and my head would be touching the ceiling, and yet that is some local authorities have it set at 1.9 as the head height, whereas the national standard is 2.3. And I'm always a bit like, well, some locations are just smaller than others. How does that work?
Well, maybe councils haven't changed their rules or updated it.
Yeah, I think that's more.
People are evolving and getting bigger and taller.
Generally,
maybe that's what it is.
Generally bigger, right? Cool. So, but the the thing from our point of view is it's the minimum, isn't it? It's the minimum space standards. I actually think the minimum space standards for a flat or dwelling house are big.
Yes.
Whereas the minimum space standards for a single bedroom in a HMO is too small.
Yeah.
That's 6.51.
Well, we basically never do 6.55. We never really do anything under a double, do we, for that reason? Because it's just, because like we were talking about before, but there's a difference between the space standards and actual selling or letting.
Yeah.
So, we want to let out a nice double room to a single occupant. So we do it to a double standard. So it's nice.
Yeah. Well, we'll do an exercise in a bit where we tick off each one. What is the class, planning, standard, that kind of thing. So, but space, again, it comes down to, especially when you come into the HMO arena, you touched on it already, which is the communal space.
Yeah.
Right. Communal space standards are all over the place.
Yeah.
So some councils, if you have double rooms, so 10.22 and above, regardless of occupants.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a double standard room.
Double size room.
Yeah. Against the space standard.
Yeah.
You can have a shared kitchen diner.
Yeah.
Some you have to have separate kitchen diners. And then some is based on the number of occupants. So normally it's 1 to 5 and 6 to 10. Right?
Yeah.
So some councils have 6 occupants, 7 occupants, 8 occupants, 9 occupants, 10 occupants, and they have different space standard, which I think is the right way to do it.
Yeah.
Because some of them have them lumped together.
A kitchen dining space for 6 people compared to 10. It needs to be dramatically different, even though the space standard is the same. Say
it's 4 extra bodies.
Yeah, 4 extra bodies, everything. So like we've looked at it we had a 10 bed that we about to start on site soon, aren't we? That we looked at the communal space and we actually had comments from council, and we looked at it and we're like, it complies, but it's nowhere near good enough for the product we want to deliver. So we made some extra space, didn't we, by blocking off basement and adding in space and making it much nicer. Yeah. And again, that comes down to good design as well.
Yeah. And in fairness, a lot of some local authorities have really good planning consultants, right? And that particular planning consultant said, look, it complies.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's going to be comfortable for that number of people. And that's the feedback.
Yeah, in actual fact, right? we didn't detail, because we do a detailed review and we do the building regulations drawing.
Yeah.
In that instance, we were like, get it through planning and then we'll re-review the drawing. So we hadn't actually done our full review. We were just getting the planning for the 10 bed in essence.
Yeah.
And then when we looked at it, we said, he's dead right. We wouldn't have actually built it to what we applied for planning.
Yeah. So space is you need to know your onions, right?
Yeah.
And really, the quick rule of thumb is, before you go and see a property, can you use it?
Yeah.
That's the rule of thumb. So and the reason I say that is, most people are looking at anywhere between 4 and 6 rooms if they're doing HMOs.
Yeah.
Right? We only do 5 and 6.
But generally, a lot of what we do are 5 to 6, aren't they? So.
Yeah. So, and the difference between a 5 occupant, and when I say beds, I mean occupants.
Yeah.
Right. So the difference between a 5-bed occupant property with 5 rooms and a 6-bed occupant with 6 rooms is massive.
Yes.
It's absolutely massive, because you get standards of 3 to 5.
Yeah.
And then you normally have standards of 6 to 10.
Yes,
and
that's where the big of a guide. It might be 25 square meters because you've got the extra living space and the extra room.
So I can technically have, if I went into 5 ensuite rooms and a kitchen diner, against the national space standards, 10.22 plus 2.5 and a bit for the ensuite. So I'm looking at 13 square meters times 5 plus 11.5 for a kitchen diner, in effect. Yeah. That's the nationally agreed.
I think 10.5 for kitchen diner, yeah. As long as they're all double-sized.
As long as they're all double-sized rooms.
Yeah, with single occupants.
With single occupants, yeah.
Depending on the council.
No, it's the space standard.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it has to have 5 occupants, yes. But you could have 4 double-sized rooms with 5 occupants.
Yes.
And still have 11.5.
Yes.
Yeah, basically. So, but we don't do that. That's just because we don't do it. But you could have.
We just know that the deal stacks up in the areas we look at about 5 onwards, doesn't it?
To put the 6th occupant in. So if you've got 5 and one of those rooms is really big and you think, I might get a couple in there, then you put in a 6th occupant in. That changes the game.
Yeah.
Hugely.
Yeah.
So at that point, you need an additional 7 to 8 square meters, depending on the council, for the kitchen diner, or you might be required to put in a separate communal space.
Yeah.
Which is council by council. You need to really understand that. How does the size of my rooms and the number of occupants equal the amount of communal space?
Yeah.
That
so basically, how that works, if you think 100 square meters might provide 5 double bedrooms with a kitchen diner communal, then to jump up to 6, it might be 125 square meters with a similar orientated property.
And yet there's 19.5 square meters might be the same as for 6 as it is for 10.
Yeah.
But we wouldn't necessarily recommend 19.5 or 10.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's-
purely from a numbers perspective, obviously
Yeah, it
10
might fit.
sounds the most efficient for the national space standards, but it still needs to work and rent out well and all those sort of things and need to be a good product. So
Yeah. Lovely. So we're going to move on from space and we're going to talk about light, which is the next part. So space, light, and right. So, and we're before we go to viewing here, this is what we need to understand.
yeah, actually just dialing back a bit, actually, it's a good point that obviously before you do a viewing, you can do a bit of a pre-qualification. You can check dimensions if there are dimensions from the agent to see. I'd use that as a bit of a guide because sometimes they miss quite a bit, or they're just a bit of a.
Well, they always take the longest.
So you get a
wall.
they always get the biggest dimension, exactly, and they don't put the chimney rests in and things like that. But it's a bit of a guide to pre-qual. Is actually, should I go to view this? If you don't have the flooring, sometimes you can look at the EPC to see what that has as the square meterage. So there are a couple of things you can check before, but then always when you go out, do your own measurements and then detail up and draw up yourself what you think's possible. And it is hard to do because you might only have half an hour or less for a viewer to measure everything.
Yeah, and that's when we go, I literally get there and I say, right, I'm going to do my process first, and we'll have a chat at the end. Yeah, because I want to get in and do the bits that I desperately need. Yeah, doing the niceties is all well and good, but I want to know the room sizes really quickly. And we don't tend to look for properties in our area anyway because of it's a capital. Property value, high yielding
mid-market.
So we are not looking to, in normal circumstances, add anything other than maybe drop a ceiling or a Velux. Add a dormer or an extension to up to 6 occupant property. Yeah, in normal circumstances, unless you get it real cheap, is too expensive.
Yeah, and then usually if you go above 6. If you do an extension, loft conversion, or sometimes a basement conversion, then it stacks up because you got the 2 extra income streams.
Yeah, but even then, your price needs to be based on the
it all works back to the numbers, doesn't it, and the return, and it all works back from that.
Yeah. So from a dimensions point of view, we're kind of at the 100 square meters plus, aren't we, for ours, which is 5 and 6 minimum standards. But I guess from a 4, you could be at sort of like 85. 80, 86 area.
If really people are doing the mini mode type scenarios,
cool. So so let's move on to light. So I asked this question, which is we do it on every discovery day, and everyone looks at each other because they don't know the answer. How many windows, natural light windows, do you need for a property that has 5 habitable rooms?
As a minimum, 6.
Okay. No, so 5 habitable rooms, which includes I'm not talking about bedrooms, just 5 habitable rooms.
Oh, 5 habitable rooms, so 5.
5,
yeah,
right?
So you're saying 4 rooms maybe in a communal.
Yeah, so if it was a HMO and it had 5 bedrooms, how many windows would you need as a minimum?
HMO, 5 bedrooms, a communal, so 6.
6, that's
as a minimum.
Yeah. As a minimum, right? Yeah. So it hardly ever works like that, right?
And that's because your bathrooms or en-suites don't require to have natural light.
Yeah, correct. So utilities cupboards where you might keep water tanks, ensuite rooms that don't require natural light.
Hallway spaces and things like that.
Hallway spaces and stuff, they don't need natural light. Obviously, the more windows, the better. Yeah. But by rule...
that's minimum. That's the minimum.
And they have to be of a certain size and standard as well. You can't have the old peak, the porthole type window in a bedroom and try and...
There's no window light taxes these days, so you don't have to put tiny windows in.
Yeah, but the thing
that would be more cost effective, I suppose. But.
The thing that people fall down on is say, oh, I'm just going to put a window in that wall, right? And what you're doing is, if you're doing, and we're going to focus now on light, but we're going to bridge into right. So what we're doing is we're saying, right, we're going to develop a HMO. So I'm going to change. I'm doing effectively a change of use. Yeah, so I'm doing a change of use. I'm then going to put in a window. Okay, what's stopping me from doing that?
So you need, if you're looking to do it under permitted development, right? So if it's in an area that does not have an Article 4 direction and you're doing a change of use under permitted development and adding in a window, you will need planning approval for that window.
Okay.
Generally, yeah.
So generally, yeah. So there are some permitted developments that you can do for windows.
Yeah.
Right. It's normally to the reverse of the building. And
I think especially
you can dormer
if you're not changing use or it's not flats. I think your straight residential houses, there's some PD rights for windows, especially on certain elevations, like you said.
Yeah.
Obviously, these are things that you always double check with, say, your planning consultant, people like that as well.
I would even though I've got a general gist on windows, I would always go to the planning consultant for a window.
Yeah, always check. This is general discussion points, so always double check with the planning consultant.
Yeah. So you may have permitted development rights to put window in. You probably don't.
Yeah.
Is the way I would recommend that people treat that.
Stop the podcast now. This episode is sponsored by Property Filter. Property Filter is the #1 property tool for today's property professional. It brings in all the data points and sources from all the property portals and auction sites into one convenient place. Then you have the option to overlay all the clever strategies found in the Property Filter blueprint to find motivated sellers faster. Now, we use it on a daily basis. It saves us over 80% of our time when looking for properties. And if that sounds like something that you want in your lives, please go to register.property-filter.co.uk/PPB, which is the discount code for this podcast. You will get 2 weeks free and a discount on your first month. That's it from me. Back to the podcast.
And that then bridges us in really nice, because lights, obviously, you just need to have the adequate natural light in the space. There's no real technical discussion other than that.
Yeah.
But it does bridge us nicely into rights, which is where any of those space things that we've already talked about get complicated, right? Because what we're talking about is a change of use versus a development change. So an actual construction change, if you like. Can't remember what the term is, but so there's two types, isn't there? You can do two things. You can either change the class use of a property, or you can apply for a development change. That's effectively the way to think about it practically at the top end. So if I'm changing use under PD...
Yeah, because obviously you can do, if you got a C3 house that you're doing a double story extension on, it's not a change of use, it's still the same sort of dwelling. It's just got a development aspect to it that needs planning approval.
Yeah, so you may need development planning approval for that, but you're not changing the use. So your C3 house or flat, or bungalow or whatever, you might be applying for that. But where people get really confused is what, like I said before, which is I'm going to do a HMO, so I've got a right to put a window in. So under a normal planning class, so I can normally do it under permitted development on my C3 property to add that window. So where people get confused is then when you have permitted development rights for change of use and you're doing something to the facade of the building. That stops there, doesn't it?
Yeah, they're two
separate
things, basically.
Yeah, so C3. So if you're doing a HMO development under permitted development, it's called C3 to C4. So C3 is a dwelling house. We talked about it earlier. C4 is a small house of occupation up to 6 occupants.
Yeah.
Right? So if I want to do something like that, then I have the permitted development right to do so, as long as that permitted development hasn't been withdrawn by the local authority.
Yes.
Under something called an Article 4 direction.
Correct.
Right. So let's say, we'll talk about Article 4 in a bit. Let's say that is available to me. So I could say, right, I can go from C3 to C4 and I want to convert this property to HMO. What do I need to give to my local planning authority to do that?
So if it's an area without an Article 4 direction and you're going up to 6 occupants and it's existing dwelling or a C3, you do not have to get any permission.
You do not have to get permission. You already have the permission. There's nothing you need to do outside of building control.
Yeah, so what I'd say is I would call that just straight permitted development rights. You don't have to ask for any permission. Where it gets more complicated is where you've got permitted development rights under prior approval, which is, say, a commercial to residential conversion.
Well, before we move on to that, I'm just going to use the same scenario. So I have a C3 class building, but I don't meet the space and or the light requirement, and I'm therefore going to either extend or I'm going to put new windows in, or I'm going to dormer, okay?
Yeah.
I'm going to do one of those 3 things. But I have a permitted development right to go from C3 to C4. What do I need to tell my planning authority?
It's a very good question. I believe you can use permitted development rights for that property. So if you're doing a single story extension up to 3 meters, as an example, you could do that without needing planning permission. A dormer, like you mentioned, if it's at the rear of the property And I believe the current rules are as long as it's set back 200 mils from the back of the property and not more.
7 meters actually. From the exterior.
Yeah, no, touching the back section. And then it's a certain percentage of the rear of the house has to be under that size as well. I can't remember the
exact. So the term is curtilage. So
yeah.
the curtilage is your boundary of your building, right? So you've got an existing garden, maybe in an existing back bit at the back, which is, let's say their standard curtilage is. The curtilage that's given when the house is launched, you're not allowed to develop more than 50% under current planning guidelines.
Yeah.
And you can't, the new extension can't be within 7 meters at the back of from the boundary of your curtilage.
Yeah.
So that's the limiting factor.
And it can't be bigger than 3 meters. Yeah, you're right. There is consultation to
finish in April as well,
to go bigger and stuff like that as well. So yeah, and then window. I think it depends on location of the windows whether that falls under PD. So definitely check out this scenario.
That's it, right? So it's fine for you to do C3 to C4, but if you're doing C3 to C4 and something within a development area, I would recommend always take advice.
Yeah, just check and take advice.
Get a planning consultant to provide you.
It could trip you up.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you're not using like a lender and you're just going to do everything for cash. Because if you get tripped up at that point and you've done the work, you could be under something called an enforcement notice to return that back to its original format. Permitted development right without needing to do anything, you can just go ahead and do it. It's worth learning those because especially at the moment there's a consultation. So the consultation on permitted developments in terms of extensions means you could do L-shaped extensions around the back now. Yep. So if you do a side extension, you used to be able to do a back one or a side one.
Yeah, not join it up.
But not join it up, which doesn't
make absolutely no sense.
Yeah, it made no sense. And then there's like the 7 meters to the back is now, I think it's only if that reverse of that then leads to a residential space. So if there's nothing behind you, you might have the ability to do that. So it's worth going and have a look at the consultation for it because I've read that because I'm boring and that's why I do spare time. So it's worth having a look at that because those new permitted development rights are going to be very, very well. They're going to be the landlord developer's friend for this next couple of years until they change the rules.
The other thing to consider, just going back to Article 4, is you might have current permitted development rights, but there may be an Article 4 direction coming in shortly.
Let's talk about Article 4
because so we know.
So what is Article 4?
So it's basically the council have a direction in place for things that, a traditionally permitted developments, but they, want control to decide whether they can go ahead or not. So an example of that is like conservation areas. If the council add that into an area, to make it conservation. So things that are permitted developments are taken away.
Yep.
And also things like HMOs are another prime example that, it's nationally, it's a permitted development right. And they put an article of direction to take that permitted development right away. So you have to apply regardless for permission.
Every single conservation area in the UK has had an Article 4 direction to some degree.
Yep.
So your local conservation Article 4 direction might be, as an example, you can't change the front facade of your property. Without planning permission. So any permitted development rights that you may have, let's say it was a double dormer to the front, as an example, you've no longer got. That's what that is, in effect.
Yeah.
And what councils have done is they've adapted the Article 4 from conservation to include the HMOs to protect, the local family type homes because, you can just convert a family home to HMO.
So the misconception is people just think, if there's an Article 4, I can't do HMOs. Yeah. And that's not what the council is saying. They're saying we just want to be able to decide and put it out to public consultation.
Yeah.
So some areas that it is very, very hard to get approval for it.
Yeah.
Because that's sort of the council policy and everything like that. There's other areas that the council will say, as long as it meets certain, policy and requirements, it can still get approval.
It's still on the National Planning Policy Framework. Again, another boring document that I read. Right. So it's still there. It's still the direction. So it's about then getting the planning officer's support.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the same with anything in planning. It's if you get the planning officer's support.
And potentially neighbours' support as well.
And potential neighbours' support. Yeah. So let's talk about rights in further. So Article 4, if there's an Article 4 direction in place that removes your rights to do that, to do a C3 to C4 class HMO, that's fine. However, you already don't have in any location the right to go above 6 occupants.
Yeah. Seven and higher, regardless of location.
And it's occupants.
Occupants, not just rooms.
Okay.
Will require full planning permission.
Okay, so 7 occupants above have always had a requirement for planning permission. Okay, so, and that isn't necessarily a negative. other than a time-consuming thing, right? So we've done 3 back-to-back planning applications, and the purpose of those planning applications was to gain permission to do more occupants than the 5 or 6.
Yep.
And we've been successful in every one back-to-back in the last year, as an example. And that's
what have we had? We had 1 at 7, 1 at 9, and 1 at 10, haven't we?
Yeah, and they've all been successful because it is in the National Planning Policy Framework to have a good mix of housing asset classes, that they want HMOs because they provide good quality, as long as they
good affordable housing.
Good affordable housing. That's it. And in terms of, if you are looking to do something through planning, we've learned, be clear on your tenant type that you're trying to attract, and be clear on the quality of the property, the housing.
Yeah, which helps with the consultation process for the neighbours.
Yeah.
Because sometimes there is bad stigma around HMOs and the type of tenant type that it could bring in. So if you are bringing a good product and you're looking for excellent tenants, that can help with the consultation process for the neighbours and planning officer to say, like, this is what we're bringing in. These are good tenants. It's a good quality product. And all those sort of things. And we're converting, say, a derelict property to bring it back to life as well. So,
yeah. And if you're adding and not taking away as well, that's seen as a positive. You're adding residential accommodation in a place where, let's say, a commercial property is sat empty for a period of time because there's no commercial tenants. That the planning office is probably going to look at that favourably, unless there's like conservation needs or something like that. Or it's a really commercial, like it's an industrial shed in the middle of an industrial site. I mean, that would just be foolish, wouldn't it? But, if it's a general, where people would want to live, and that commercial property has seen its life, then they're probably going to support your application, right?
And be clear on the application with the occupants and rooms, because sometimes, like we have 7 double rooms, but the application was 7 occupants. And what happens is people say, it's 7 double rooms, there could be 14 people. But if you clear in the application that, no, it's for 7 occupants. It's for 7 people. We can't have more than 7 because we haven't applied for more than 7. So it can't be what you're saying.
So why would we do double rooms?
They're a nicer product, and they rent well in the market.
There's license standards as well, right?
Yeah, and licensing standards.
So, and that's where we come to the next part of rights. What's the difference between planning and licensing?
They're a different department. So planning is permission for the use or development, where licensing is complying with more like housing standards, basically.
Yeah.
So they are both with the council, but they are separate departments.
So planning dictates occupants more so than licensing.
No, both.
Well,
depending.
Dictates.
So planning will completely dictate, because what you've applied for is what you got permission for.
Yeah.
Licensing, your design will allow what occupants you have. So you could theoretically, have a planning approval for 7, but your design could meet 10. So theoretically, you could get permission for 10 occupants licensing, but only have permission for planning 7. So, if you did let it to 10 people, licensing is okay, but you're in breach of planning.
And it's the one thing that people get really confused upon, especially when we're buying property, is that licensing has nothing to do with planning when it comes down to certain things. Like, we're buying a property at the moment, and that property it was done under permitted development rights. Since that was done, Article 4 direction came in, right? We're trying to buy that property. There's no current established use class. So there's no C4 use class with the local authority because it was done under PD. So they've never had to apply for one.
Yeah.
Yep. So we want to apply for something called a lawful certificate. Yeah. And yet our objections to, we want to get this lawful certificate in the planning department are met with, here's the license.
Yeah.
Repeatedly. We've been sent to 3 times.
That's the agent, wasn't it? So the agent.
Well, it's not just the agent. It's the agent, the solicitor, the seller.
Yeah.
None of those people were understanding that we would need to be able to prove
the planning use class.
The planning use class of C4. So what happens in that perspective? What are we trying to achieve when Article 4 direction comes in?
So in that scenario, the development it became a HMO before the Article 4 direction came in, but the problem is they've got no planning approval, but it is an area that needs planning approval. So it's more showing you have to be able to demonstrate that it was done before the time frame. So you need evidence for that. So the cleanest way, and usually, the cleanest way is what you want to give to a lender, basically. Because if you refinance, they go, it's an Article 4 direction area, you don't have planning, sorry. But you say, well, actually,
no. Yep.
Yeah, it's just computer says no. So even though it was, what's the evidence? So the first bit of evidence, the easiest way to do it is a lawful certificate. It's like, here's a lawful certificate that says that it was a HMO before the Article 4 direction came in. So it completely complies with planning. But then sometimes to get the lawful certificate retrospectively, you need to demonstrate to the council that it was developed and up and running before. So in this circumstance, I think I know the property you're talking about. There was actually a building control sign off that we found online that showed that it was fully signed off from a building control perspective as a HMO before the Article 4 direction came in. And further to that, depending on the Article 4 direction timing, because we know that Salford Council at the moment have been writing later in the year that as long as you've started the development before Article 4 comes in, it complies, which may have been the case then, but it's fine.
It is the case. It was in the instruction. Yeah.
So
in the directions.
So, as long as we had that building control certificate, and then also if we had if the vendor had ASTs from the time or council tax that show as a HMO at that time, then you send that to the council and apply for the lawful cert. Obviously, you have to pay for it. I think it's about £1,000, so it's not cheap, but it just means every time you refinance or go to a lender, it's very easy to say, like, yes, we know it's Article 4, but here's the lawful certificate to say it was a HMO before that direction came in.
Yeah, and in fairness, that can add value to your property as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Because all of a sudden, if you've got a property that you can't just do under permitted development anymore, then it becomes scarcer.
Yeah,
because no more of those properties are going to be developed in that way without planning, and that scares a lot of people off, right?
Yeah. So if you're selling a HMO, you want the lease, you want all of your ducks in a row. You're like, here's all the certificates, here's all the permissions. So any buyer, there's no hurdles for them.
I think it's a bigger risk to wait until you're looking to sell it, because let's say
it gets harder later, doesn't it?
Let's say you've used it for 7 years as a HMO. Like, the only way to truly show that you've had it as a HMO is through council tax records and ASTs.
Yeah. Because
if there's a gap, then there's no way that you can prove that you didn't use that for its original use class.
Yeah, it's consistent use as well.
So it's consistent use as that C4 development. So in this case, we're going to be trying. We're really going to be trying our arm to say it was building control. Here's the license and here's the council tax records. We don't necessarily have the ASTs, so their case is a little bit weaker. I mean, if it is unable to sell as a HMO, then we've got...
And it comes down to the council and weighing up probability to say, is it more likely that it's been a HMO for continual use than less likely? Then theoretically, they should give you the lawful certificate.
Yeah, exactly.
If there's no real proof or information, then they might say, well, it's less likely that what you've applied for is true.
Yeah. So this then brings us to where things get a little bit messy. Right. So we're going to try and clear some things up, if that's all right. So I have a 6 occupant HMO.
Yep.
Okay. Who determines the number of occupants that I am allowed to use in that property? Planning or licensing?
Both.
Yeah, so your license will be granted for 6 people, but who determines it? Who says in the first sentence how many occupants you can have?
Well, so if it's 6, you might be in a permitted development area that doesn't have an Article 4 direction, so they doesn't necessarily need to have any planning in place. So as long as it doesn't jump to 7,
okay,
under planning, you've got straight
under planning. So we've got permitted development for 6 occupants.
Yeah.
Okay. So 6 occupants.
Yeah.
Now, are they in double rooms or single rooms?
It's just occupants.
It's occupants. It doesn't matter on the type of room, right?
Planning wise, does not matter. It's just occupants.
Okay, so I've got an 11.5. I've got a 19.5 square meter kitchen diner.
Yeah.
Does it matter if they're single or double rooms?
No. Sorry.
Beds. Sorry.
Yeah. So if you got 6 rooms and you've got 1 communal space at 19, then all of those rooms would need to be double.
They would need to be double rooms, which is 10.22 square meters.
Yeah, double-sized rooms, but...
And who determines that? Planning or licensing?
Licensing.
That's licensing.
Yeah, that's licensing space standards.
So even though planning has said I can have 6 people living there, licensing are saying to have 6 people living there and...
Well, actually, depending on the national space standards, you could have up to 10, I believe, in that circumstance.
You could have up to 10?
Yeah.
But what did planning say?
Planning doesn't comply with 10, and it complies with
You can only have 6. Yeah. So I can have 6 single rooms if I wanted, but then I would have to provide
But
separate.
what you could do in that scenario is you could develop as 6 occupants if it stacks as a 6 occupant deal, 6 bedrooms, get that up and running, and then once it's up and running, you could then apply to the council to go, if you want to go to 9 or 10 beds, because it complies from a licensing perspective, and jump up to 9 or 10 beds.
Occupants.
And in the first instance, you could apply the license as 10 and just explain to the council that you won't use it for 10 until the planning goes through, if they query it.
Yeah.
So you could have a license for 10, but only allowed 6 under planning, and then upgrade the planning from 6 to say a 10 to then get more occupants in.
Yeah.
And again, that comes down to if you want dual occupant rooms.
Yeah.
Because we've got 6 rooms there, but 10 occupants. So you've got some couples there, and it's like, do you want that in the house dynamic? And are you going to get more rent, or is it going to cause more problems than it's worth, and all those sort of things?
Yeah. Well, you'd have
things you got to weigh.
You'd have three rooms with double occupants, wouldn't you? And then
because I think what happens generally in that sort of scenario is the couples are more likely to use more of the communal space and the kitchen space and stuff like that. And sometimes they push out these single occupant tenants and stuff. So you got to weigh it up if it's the right thing to do or not in that circumstance.
Okay, so we're at the start of the journey then. So the number of occupants is determined by planning initially, and then agreed by licensing. That's what we're saying.
Yeah.
The size of the room is then determined under licensing how big the communal space is.
Yeah.
And what amenities need to be provided, cupboard space, that kind of stuff is under the HMO licensing standards.
Yeah.
Okay. What about sales?
When you sell the property,
when you're selling the rooms to the tenants, how is that impacted by planning and or licensing in your mind?
So you can there's no set requirements, I don't believe, for like say AST doesn't say you have to have a license and display it to the tenant. I don't believe.
Yeah, no, you have to have a license and you display it to the tenant. So from a sales perspective, okay, so where I'm getting at here is...
But do you have to show the tenant the planning approval? I don't think so.
So let's say I've got a single room, but it's 9.5 square meters. Let's give you an example of that.
Yeah.
Okay. But it's got a double bed. How do I sell that to a tenant? Do I sell it as a single room?
It's a double room. If you've got an ensuite, just be...
Double room with ensuite.
Double room with ensuite.
Right. But from a planning perspective, it classes as a single room.
Single room. Yeah.
From a licensing perspective, it classes as a single room. But from a sales perspective, it's got a double bed.
Double beds as double room.
And people miss out on that all the time. I see these adverts all the time. Single room. And it's got a double bed in it. I think, well, it's not a single room then. It's only single.
Yeah, because the search parameters, you can pick single or double bed, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're selling a single bed to somebody who's looking for a double bed when it's got a double bed.
Yeah.
Just because planning and licensing told you it was a single room. So there's always that thing.
Yeah, the sales is different.
And where this comes down to the biggest, I would say, abuse of the national space standards. But in the same breath, when I say abuse, what I mean is because the space standard I think is too big and wholly wrong, is the C3 dwelling. The 37 to 39 square meter, 1 bed, 1 occupant dwelling.
Yeah. How lonely are you in that room? 1 person, 1 occupant.
That's massive.
Yeah.
Right. So if you think of like the average terraced property, 70 square meters.
Yeah.
Right. This is 5 meters bigger. So your entire ground floor of a terraced house, your front room, back room, and kitchen.
Yeah.
Your entire ground floor plus 5 meters, and you're saying only 1 person can live in that.
Yeah.
So that is the one where sales becomes a real thing because yes, under planning, it is a 1 bed, 1 occupant. But sales, planning, and licensing are 3 separate topics in my personal opinion.
Agreed.
And then you can do other things. So one of the reasons that one of the biggest changes when it comes to HMOs in the last year is council tax, right? So I think I don't know whether I can't remember the actual. If you have a licensed under category 2, like 257, don't quote me on that. Wendy Whittaker would tell you a bit better about this. Large will tell you a bit about what specifically it is. If you are licensed under that now, your dwelling is classed as 1 dwelling under council tax. Whereas before, there was some fear about rebanding or reaggregating those rooms into independent.
Well, it wasn't a fear; it was happening.
It was happening. Well, yeah, but it was stopping people from doing certain things.
It was a worry, as a big risk because if you're charging per room as you would 1 dwelling, it was killing any.
Yeah, 150 quid council tax per room all of a sudden versus 150 quid for the thing. However, that's been stopped by the national government for now. We hope forever, but for now. And one of the things that they always talked about is the facilities. So they looked at, and even though that wasn't national again, it was down to the VOA and the local authority to decide what facilities they classed as one dwelling. It meant that we didn't put as many facilities in some of our rooms.
Yeah, because there's a fear that it would be classed as a dwelling if it had a kitchenette or even an ensuite.
Yeah, but now if you've got the number one thing that we're applied for is working professionals to our because we target those types of tenants.
Yeah.
The number two thing is couples. So if I've got a self-contained larger room, flats used to be around 20 meters, right? So if I've got a larger room of 18 to 20 meters and I can get an ensuite and a kitchenette, technically, but that whole property is classed as is under license for a HMO, then I could be considering double occupancy.
And then you could also got the choice of sharing the communal space as well.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So there's things that you can do now to upgrade the living experience of people in those environments that gets away from that really silly one bed, one occupant, 37 to 39 square meters.
And that's what makes it a really valuable product. Because if you've got a really good, let's say you've got an 18 square meter double HMO room with a kitchenette and ensuite, and then there's some separate communal space as well.
Yeah.
And you've got bills all included, fast broadband, and you're paying, say, $8.50 a month, and it's for 2 occupants.
Yeah.
Or you do your studio flat scenario that you mentioned that with a bath at 39 square meters with 1 occupant.
Yeah.
And, someone's just developed it, and, it won't be bills included because it's a flat, you know, and they're trying to rent that for £1,000 a month. So add on bills, you're talking $1,300 a month. So you're good £400-500 different in that scenario and quite a bit lonelier.
Well, yeah, you've got your 15 to 18 square meter room that you're sharing, and you've got your own kitchenette, might have a hob or something, or an air fryer. And then you've got your communal space where you can get out there, maybe some workspace or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is better? The 850 quid inclusive of bills, or the 1,300 quid?
Oh, definitely.
£900 flat plus bills of 400 quid.
For value, and if you got a quality product, it's an absolute no-brainer.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a real good opportunity in what's happened with it in this last week, which is why I mentioned it.
Yeah, but understand that things may change in the future. So because it was happening before, it might come back. They might go, all right, we're rebanding, but only if they got a kitchenette in it. Yeah. And then you got to weigh up I put the kitchenette for now. If that's happened, maybe I just take the kitchen out. It. Yeah. Or something like that. And just understanding there are potential risks that can happen.
There are. Okay. And then, so I think we've really muddied the planning versus licenses versus sales enough there. It's not
easy. Hope we haven't confused you too much.
Well, we may have confused you a little bit, but it just goes to show that we do this all day, every day. And even now, we don't always know the right answer.
And you always need to talk, we have consultants that we're talking to daily, aren't we?
Yeah.
Even though we're dealing with it day in, day out. So always have those professionals in your team.
Yeah. Planning, occupants. That's the way I remember it. Planning is on occupants. Licensing will go with planning. Licensing dictates my communal space requirement. And then I always need to check that with my local authority. And also my bed space requirement.
And then when you're selling, you want to sell it to the best quality.
But when I'm selling it, I'm selling what it is in the room. I'm selling what I can physically see. So if it's a flat that's supposed to be 1 bed, 1 occupant, but it's a 37 meter square flat, and I'm selling that as a flat.
But just think about good quality design is like these standards are minimums. They're compliance things. They think about good design and what actually works and what will work for the user.
Correct. Lovely. And there we go. Space, lights and rights. Clear as mud.
Good chat. Thanks very much.
No worries. Catch you on the next one. Thank you once again for joining us on the Financial Freedom Podcast, sponsored by us at Property Portfolio Building. If you want to get in touch with us about today's podcast or any of the learning topics that we've gone through today, you can email us at podcast@invest-prop.co.uk or get in touch with us with whichever your social media platform of choice is. If you think you would add value to us as a guest on this podcast, you can please get in touch and let us know what you would be able to talk to us about. Other than that, we wish you well on your financial freedom journeys. And once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one.